Nathan hesitated for a moment. He could have walked away. He should have walked away. But he didn't. Instead, his feet carried him forward, his pulse quickening with every step. The closer he got, the clearer the picture became. The dark circles under Sophie's eyes, the way she held her daughters tightly against her, as if she feared the wind might steal them away. One of the little girls, no older than 4, was rubbing her tiny hands together, her breath forming weak puffs of mist in the cold air. The other clung to her mother's arm, wide eyes staring up at the passing crowd, hoping, begging for someone to stop. Nathan swallowed hard. This wasn't just a woman in need. This was her. Sophie? His voice barely broke through the chaos of the city. But it was enough. The woman's head lifted slowly, her tangled brown hair falling in front of her face before she brushed it away with trembling fingers. When her eyes met his, confusion flickered across her features, followed by something far more painful, recognition. Natan. Her voice was hoarse, tired, as if it hadn't been used in days. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them faded, the noise becoming a dull hum, as the weight of the past and the brutality of the present collided between them. Nathan's gaze dropped to the 2 children nestled against her side. They were identical. Twins. Their small faces round and innocent, their worn-out clothes barely offering protection against the biting cold. His jaw clenched. How did this happen? Sophie, what? He started, but Sophie turned her head away. Don't. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the exhaustion in it was deafening. Nathan frowned. What do you mean, don't? Sophie? What the hell happened to you? She let out a shaky breath, her arms tightening around her daughters. It doesn't matter, we're fine. Just go, Nathan, please. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. He didn't know what he expected. That she would look up at him and be relieved? That she would welcome his concern? But this wasn't high school anymore. She was no longer the girl who once seemed untouchable, and he was no longer the awkward teenager who admired her from afar. Life had changed them both in ways neither of them could have imagined. And yet something inside Nathan refused to leave. He crouched down, lowering himself to her level. The icy pavement soaked through the fabric, expensive trousers, but he didn't care. He crouched down, lowering himself to her level. The icy pavement soaked through the fabric of his expensive trousers, but he didn't care. Sophie, look at me, he urged gently. You're sitting out here in the freezing cold with 2 little girls. You're not fine. Sophie's lips trembled, but she lifted her chin stubbornly. We don't need your help. One of the girls, Ella, if he heard correctly, hiccuped through her tears. Her tiny voice was barely audible. Mommy, I'm hungry. Nathan felt his heart clench. That was it. That was the breaking point. Without another word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Sophie asked warily. Fixing this, he said firmly, pressing a speed dial. Be here in 5 minutes, and bring blankets. Sophie's eyes widened. Nathan, no. I don't need your pity. This isn't pity, Sophie, Nathan said, his voice surprisingly soft. It's a damn reality check. You and your girls shouldn't be out here. Sophie shook her head, but the fight in her eyes was fading. A cold breeze swept through the streets, causing Ella and Lily to shiver. Sophie instinctively pulled them closer, her maternal instincts outweighing her pride. Nathan saw the struggle in her expression, the part of her that wanted to refuse, to keep her dignity intact, warring against the part of her that knew she had no other option. After a long silence, she finally whispered, Okay? Nathan exhaled, his chest feeling oddly lighter, despite the weight of what he had just done. As his black SUV pulled up to the curb, Nathan extended his hand towards Sophie. She hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she reached out. And for the first time in years, Sophie Brooks let someone else carry a piece of her burden. And Nathan Cole had no idea that this one decision would change everything. The ride was silent. Sophie sat rigidly in the plush leather seat of Nathan's SUV, her fingers gripping the edges of the thin blanket he had draped over her shoulders. Ella and Lily, still bundled up in their ragged clothes, curled up next to her, exhausted. The warmth of the car's heater seemed to lull them into a fragile sleep, their small bodies pressed against their mother for comfort. Nathan sat across from them, his sharp gaze flickering between the road ahead and the woman sitting stiffly beside him. He could feel the tension radiating off her, the unspoken war raging inside her mind. She didn't trust him. Hell, he didn't blame her. If someone had told him years ago that Sophie Brooks, the confident, untouchable girl from high school, would one day be sitting in his car, homeless and broken, he wouldn't have believed it. And yet here she was. Nathan sighed and loosened his tie. "This isn't a trap, Sophie." His voice broke the silence. She flinched slightly, but didn't meet his eyes. "I didn't say it was." "You're acting like it is." Sophie swallowed, pulling the blanket tighter around her. I don't understand why you're doing this." Nathan exhaled, staring out the window. The lights of the city flashed past them, a stark contrast to the darkness Sophie had been living in. "Maybe I don't, either," he admitted. That seemed to catch her off guard. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, as if trying to read his true intentions. Nathan met her gaze without hesitation. What did she see? A stranger? A former classmate? A man who had once been invisible to her, but now held all the power? Or something else? The car slowed to a stop in front of a towering high-rise in the Upper East Side. Nathan stepped out first, adjusting his coat against the biting wind, before turning back to Sophie. "Come on," he said simply. Sophie hesitated. She looked up at the building, its pristine glass exterior, the warm glow of expensive chandeliers, visible through the grand lobby windows. It was a world away from where she had been just an hour ago. "Nathan, I can't." "Yes, you can," he cut her off. "I'm not letting you and your daughters sleep outside tonight." Sophie's hands curled into fists. "I don't want to owe you." "You won't." "That's not how the world works, Nathan," she snapped. Nathan held her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "It does tonight." Another long pause. Then, as if the weight of exhaustion was too much to carry anymore, Sophie exhaled shakily. She reached down and gently nudged her daughters awake. "Come on, babies," she murmured, her voice softer than before. "Let's go inside." Nathan watched as she scooped up Lily, while Ella rubbed her sleepy eyes, holding onto her mother's coat tightly. As they stepped into the building, Sophie visibly tensed under the stares of the doorman and lobby staff. She instinctively pulled her daughters closer, as if expecting to be thrown out at any moment. Nathan, however, ignored the judgmental glances. He led them to the private elevator, swiping his keycard, before stepping aside so Sophie could enter first. "Penthouse?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "You really don't do small, do you?" she muttered under her breath. Nathan smirked, but said nothing. The elevator ride was suffocatingly quiet. Sophie's gaze darted between the mirrored walls, taking in her own reflection. The tangled hair, the tired eyes, the coat Nathan had draped over her shoulders earlier. She looked like she didn't belong here, and deep down, she knew it. When the doors slid open, they stepped into a space that felt like another world entirely. The penthouse was vast, its modern design sleek and minimalistic. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the breathtaking city skyline, while the open-concept living room exuded a kind of wealth that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Sophie swallowed hard. She had once dreamed of living in a place like this. Now, she felt like an intruder. A soft gasp pulled her attention downward. Ella and Lily were staring, wide-eyed, at the enormous Christmas tree in the corner of the room. It was decorated with golden ribbons, twinkling fairy lights, and glass ornaments that shimmered under the glow. For a moment, their hardship seemed to melt away, replaced by the innocent wonder of childhood. "Is this your house?" Lily whispered, clutching Sophie's sleeve. Nathan crouched down so he was at their eye level. "It's our house for tonight," he said. "And you can touch anything you want, except the glass ornaments." Ella giggled. "Mommy always says that too." Nathan shot Sophie a small smirk. "Then she's got good instincts." Sophie, despite herself, felt a warmth creep into her chest. A throat cleared behind them. Mrs. Carter, Nathan's housekeeper, stood at the entrance of the kitchen, her sharp gaze assessing Sophie and her daughters with quiet skepticism. "Sir," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" Nathan straightened. "Mrs. Carter, this is Sophie Brooks, and these are her daughters, Ella and Lily. They'll be staying here tonight." Mrs. Carter's gaze flickered toward Sophie again, her expression unreadable. "Understood," she said finally. "I'll prepare the guest room." Sophie bristled at the formal tone, suddenly feeling like a charity case. "You don't have to. I want to," Nathan interrupted. Mrs. Carter disappeared down the hallway, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Nathan sighed. "Look, I know this is weird. I know you don't want to be here. But at least for tonight, let me do this. For them." Sophie hesitated, then finally nodded. "Okay." Nathan turned to the girls. "Are you hungry?" Ella and Lily both nodded enthusiastically. Nathan smiled. "Good. Because I make a mean grilled cheese." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "Don't look so shocked," he teased. "I may be rich, but I wasn't always this rich." Sophie didn't know why, but the thought of Nathan Cole, Mr. Perfect Billionaire, flipping grilled cheese sandwiches, was oddly endearing. As he disappeared into the kitchen, she let out a slow breath. This wasn't where she thought she would end up tonight. But for the first time in a long time, she and her daughters were warm, safe, and full. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, that meant something. The scent of grilled cheese lingered in the air as Sophie sat at the kitchen island, watching Nathan move around with effortless ease. The sleek, modern kitchen seemed almost too pristine to have ever been used. Yet here he was, flipping sandwiches as if he did this every night. Ella and Lily sat on the stools beside her, their tiny legs swinging in excitement. They had already devoured one sandwich each, their stomachs no longer empty for the first time in what felt like forever. Sophie, however, barely touched hers. Her stomach was in knots, not because of the food, no, the grilled cheese was perfect, but because reality was sinking in. She was sitting in Nathan Cole's penthouse, wearing his spare clothes, letting her daughters laugh and play, as if this was their home. She didn't know how to feel about it. Nathan slid a fresh plate in front of her. "Eat." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Are you always this bossy?" "Only when people are being stubborn." She huffed, but picked up the sandwich anyway, taking a small bite. It was warm and comforting, and for a second, she let herself enjoy it. Nathan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. "What?" she muttered, feeling his gaze. "You tell me." Sophie set the sandwich down and wiped her hands on a napkin. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Nathan's jaw tensed slightly before he spoke. "Because I remember you, Sophie." But I don't recognize the person sitting in front of me. Her stomach twisted. Of course, he remembered. High school. The years when everything was different. When she had the world at her feet. When she had dreams, ambition, plans. When Nathan Cole was just a quiet, awkward kid who sat in the back of the class, unnoticed. But life had changed them both. Sophie's gaze dropped to the counter. People change. Nathan studied her for a moment before pushing off the counter. Yeah, they do. The weight of the conversation pressed against her chest, and she needed air. She slid off the stool. I should check on the girls. Nathan didn't stop her. He just watched as she walked away. The guest room was warm. The lights dimmed low. Ella and Lily lay curled up under the softest blankets they had ever felt, their tiny hands gripping the plush stuffed animals Nathan had given them earlier. Sophie knelt beside the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Ella's forehead. Mommy? Ella murmured sleepily. Yeah, baby. Is Mr. Nathan nice? Sophie hesitated. I think so. Ella's lips curled into a small smile. I like him. Sophie swallowed past the lump in her throat. Me too, Lily whispered, already half asleep. Sophie let out a slow breath, pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads. I love you both, she whispered. As she stood and turned off the bedside lamp, she couldn't ignore the small voice in the back of her mind. You can't stay here forever. Nathan was in his office when she found him. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire wall, showcasing the glittering skyline of Manhattan. He sat at a sleek black desk, his laptop open, but his gaze wasn't on the screen. It was on an old yearbook. Sophie's heart clenched. He was looking at her, a photo from senior year, her smiling, bright-eyed, full of life. Nathan glanced up as she entered. You were the queen of our high school, you know that? Sophie sighed. That was a long time ago. You barely noticed me back then. She flinched at the quiet honesty in his voice. I was an idiot, she admitted. I thought I had everything figured out. And then, life happened. Nathan closed the yearbook. Tell me. Sophie hesitated. Then, before she could change her mind, she sat down across from him, and she told him everything. She met Ryan Morgan during her freshman year of college. He was charming, older, confident. He swept her off her feet, made her believe in forever. And then, one day, she was pregnant. Sophie laughed bitterly, shaking her head. When I told him, he didn't even hesitate. He just walked away, said he wasn't ready to be a father, that I was ruining his future. Nathan's hands clenched into fists. Sophie swallowed. I thought I could do it alone. I tried. But then I lost my job. The bills piled up, and suddenly I had 2 babies and nowhere to go. Nathan was silent, and then finally he said, Where is he now? Sophie exhaled shakily. I don't know, and I don't care. That was a lie, because someone had found her tonight, and she had the text message to prove it. Nathan's expression darkened as he read the message. You can't hide from the past. I'll be seeing you soon. Sophie wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know who sent it, but I have a feeling. Nathan stood abruptly. Ryan. Sophie flinched. I don't know. Maybe. But why now? Nathan turned, his expression unreadable. Because he knows you're here. A chill ran down her spine. Nathan grabbed his phone. I'm having security upgraded. Cameras, guards. No one gets in without my permission. Sophie's breath caught. Nathan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was sharp, leaving no room for argument. You're not alone in this, Sophie. Something inside her cracked. For so long, she had fought alone. But now she wasn't sure she had to anymore. Hours later, Sophie lay awake in bed. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a storm. Nathan's kindness unsettled her, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt safe. And she hadn't felt safe in a long time. A sudden noise made her stiffen. The sound of footsteps outside. She sat up, heart pounding. And then, a shadow moved past the bedroom window. Sophie's blood ran cold. Someone was out there. The first rays of morning light filtered through the tall windows of Nathan Cole's penthouse, casting a soft glow over the modern interior. The city was already alive, horns blaring from the streets below, the distant hum of early commuters filling the air. But inside, it was eerily quiet. Sophie sat at the small breakfast table in the kitchen, cradling a steaming cup of coffee between her hands. She hadn't slept. The memory of the shadow outside her window last night had kept her awake, every creak of the building sending her heart into overdrive. It had been years since she had felt truly safe, and she knew better than to believe that one night under Nathan's roof could change that. Across from her, Nathan sat, reading something on his phone. His jaw was tense, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "I increased the security overnight," he said, voice firm. "No one gets in or out of this building without my say-so." Sophie swallowed. "You didn't have to." "I did." His eyes darkened. "Whoever was watching you last night isn't going to get near you again." A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to be grateful. She was grateful. But at the same time, this felt wrong. Like she was taking too much, relying on someone she barely knew anymore. This wasn't her home. She couldn't get comfortable. She shouldn't get comfortable. Nathan seemed to sense the turmoil in her mind. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly, "if you don't want to." Sophie's heart clenched. She had nowhere else to go. But before she could respond, a small, sleepy voice broke the silence. "Mommy?" She turned to see Ella standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. Lily trailed behind her, holding onto the hem of her sister's oversized t-shirt. Sophie's chest tightened. They had never looked so at peace. Nathan gave her a knowing look. For now, she wasn't going anywhere. By mid-morning, the apartment was filled with a warmth Sophie hadn't expected. Ella and Lily, once so reserved, had begun exploring the penthouse as if it were a new playground. Nathan had surprised them with a children's book collection he had stashed away in one of his guest rooms, something he had kept from his younger cousin's visits years ago. "Pick one," Nathan told them, crouching to their level. Ella's eyes widened. "Anyone?" "Anyone." The little girl's fingers danced over the book spines before she settled on Goodnight Moon. Lily, still hesitant, reached for Corduroy. Nathan grinned. "Good choices." He led them to the large couch in the living room, settling in between them. Sophie stood nearby, watching. He looked so out of place sitting there, in his expensive tailored shirt and crisp slacks, holding a children's book in his lap. And yet, the sight stirred something inside her. She had never seen a man sit with her daughters and read to them. Not like this. Not like he wanted to. As he began to read, his voice low and soothing, Ella and Lily leaned in, hanging on to every word. For the first time in a long time, Sophie felt something close to hope. That evening, after dinner, Sophie found herself standing in front of the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes. Mrs. Carter, the housekeeper, had already insisted that guests didn't have to do chores, but Sophie couldn't just sit there. Nathan entered, arms crossed. "You don't have to do that, you know." Sophie turned off the faucet, shaking her head. "I have to do something, Nathan." He leaned against the counter. "That guilt talking?" She stiffened. She didn't respond, but she didn't have to. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't owe me anything, Sophie. She swallowed past the lump in her throat. That's not how the world works, Nathan. His eyes locked onto hers. Maybe not, but it's how I work. Something flickered in her chest. She didn't know what to say to that. Later that night, Mrs. Carter quietly observed Sophie as she tucked the twins into bed. She had been skeptical of this woman at first, skeptical of her intentions, of the potential chaos she could bring into Nathan's structured life. But now, watching the way Sophie smoothed her daughter's blankets, whispering soft reassurances into their tiny ears, Mrs. Carter saw something different. She saw a mother who had been through hell and was still standing. For the first time since their arrival, Mrs. Carter felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but it was something. Sophie was jolted awake by a loud noise. Her heart pounded as she sat up, listening. Another thud. This time, she recognized the sound. It was coming from outside. She hurried to the window and pulled back the curtain. Her stomach dropped. A man stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, watching the building, watching her. She stumbled back, pulse racing. It was happening again. Nathan. She had to tell Nathan. She rushed out of her room and into the hallway, only to collide with a solid chest. She rushed out of her room and into the hallway, only to collide with a solid chest. Strong hands gripped her arms. Whoa, hey! She looked up. Nathan. Someone's outside, she gasped. His expression turned deadly serious. Where? She pointed to the window. Nathan didn't hesitate. He moved, his footsteps quick and controlled, as he reached for his phone. Security, he barked into the receiver. Check the perimeter, now. Sophie hugged herself, her breath shaky. Nathan turned back to her. He won't get in, he promised. His voice was steady, certain. Sophie wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. Sophie barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of the man standing outside replayed in her mind. The way he leaned against the lamppost, watching, waiting. Who was he? And more importantly, what did he want? She had seen enough in her life to know that people didn't just lurk outside someone's home without a reason. Nathan had assured her that security was handling it, that no one could get past the building's advanced surveillance system. But Sophie knew better than to feel safe, because danger had a way of slipping through the cracks. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was afraid for her daughters. Morning arrived with a knock on her bedroom door. Sophie sat up, rubbing her tired eyes. Mommy? It was Lily, her small voice barely above a whisper. Sophie opened the door and kneeled down. What's wrong, baby? Lily hesitated. There was a man outside yesterday. Sophie's heart stopped. Ella apareció detrás de su hermana, asintiendo. We saw him from the window. He looked scary. Sophie forced a smile. He's gone now, sweetheart. You don't have to worry. But she was worried. She dressed quickly and found Nathan in the living room, already in his usual crisp suit, reading something on his phone. He looked up when he saw her. Good morning, he said, setting his coffee down. We need to talk, Sophie blurted. Nathan's expression immediately shifted. She sat across from him, gripping the edge of the table. The twins saw him. The man from last night. They were watching from the window. Nathan's jaw tightened. That's it. We're getting more security. Before she could protest, he was already dialing a number. Nathan, you don't have to. He cut her off. Yes, I do. Sophie let out a slow breath. Maybe for once, she should stop fighting him on this, because something in her gut told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Later that afternoon, Sophie received a message. It was an unknown number. Her stomach twisted as she read it. "We need to talk. About the twins." She dropped the phone. There was only one person who could have sent that. Ryan. Sophie stood frozen in place, staring at the screen. Her mind raced. Ryan had disappeared 4 years ago without a trace. He hadn't called. He hadn't written. And now, suddenly, he wanted to talk. She didn't believe in coincidences. Sophie clenched her fists. Ryan wasn't reaching out because he missed them. He wanted something, and she was afraid she already knew what it was. Nathan noticed the shift in her demeanor the moment she entered the penthouse. Sophie's face was pale, her eyes unfocused. "What happened?" he asked immediately. She hesitated before handing him the phone. Nathan read the message, his expression darkening. "Ryan?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Sophie nodded. Nathan set the phone down carefully, but there was nothing calm about his body language. "Did you reply?" "No." "Good." Silence stretched between them. Then Sophie finally whispered, "What if he tries to take them?" Nathan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "He won't." Sophie let out a shaky breath. But Nathan wasn't finished. "I'm going to find out what he's after." And for once, Sophie didn't argue. Nathan wasn't the type of man who sat back and waited for things to unfold. When he wanted answers, he took action. By evening, he had already put a private investigator on Ryan. What he found made his blood boil. Ryan wasn't just in debt. He was drowning in it. Gambling, illegal dealings, loan sharks breathing down his neck. And now, Nathan knew exactly why he was trying to crawl back into Sophie's life. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about leverage. Nathan clenched his jaw. Ryan wanted money, and he was willing to use the twins to get it. Nathan arranged a meeting, a quiet, neutral location, a high-end bar, where Ryan wouldn't be able to cause a scene. Nathan arrived first, his presence commanding, as he sat in a private booth, waiting. Then, the door opened. Ryan Morgan stepped inside. Nathan took him in, the expensive suit that didn't quite fit anymore, the forced confidence in his stride. Ryan thought he still had the upper hand. He was wrong. Ryan slid into the booth across from Nathan, flashing a lazy grin. "Cole, it's been a while." Nathan didn't smile. "Cut the act. What do you want?" Ryan chuckled. "Straight to business. I always liked that about you." Nathan's patience was razor thin. "Get to the point." Ryan leaned back. "All right, here's the deal. Sophie owes me." Nathan's hands curled into fists under the table. Ryan continued. "I was robbed, Nathan. She took off with my kids and left me with nothing. I have a right to see them." Nathan's voice was ice. "You abandoned them." Ryan shrugged. "Water under the bridge. Let's talk about the future." Nathan didn't blink. "There's no future for you here." Ryan's grin faltered. Nathan leaned in. "Stay away from Sophie. Stay away from the twins. If you even think about threatening them, I'll make sure you regret it." Ryan's expression hardened. "You think your money scares me?" Nathan smiled coldly. "I don't think. I know." For the first time, Ryan hesitated, because he knew exactly what Nathan Cole was capable of. And Nathan wasn't making an empty threat. Ryan exhaled sharply. "Fine. But I expect compensation." Nathan's eyes turned to steel. "You won't get a cent from me." Ryan stood abruptly. "We'll see about that." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. Nathan watched him go. This wasn't over. Ryan was desperate, and desperate men made reckless decisions. Back at the penthouse, Sophie paced the floor, anxiety clawing at her chest. When Nathan finally returned, She rushed to him. "What did he say?" Nathan exhaled. "Exactly what I expected. He wants money. He wants leverage. And he's not going to stop." Sophie swallowed hard. "So, what do we do?" Nathan met her gaze, unwavering. "We fight." Sophie nodded. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ryan wasn't done yet, and the worst was still to come. Sophie felt the weight of the past crashing down on her. Even with Nathan's reassurance, even knowing he was willing to protect her, there was a sinking feeling in her gut that she just couldn't shake. Ryan wasn't a man who gave up easily. And if there was one thing she knew with absolute certainty, it was that he wouldn't walk away without getting what he wanted. But what scared her the most? Ryan always had a backup plan. 2 days later, a knock on the penthouse door shattered the fragile peace. Mrs. Carter answered, her expression unreadable, as she stepped back to reveal a woman in a gray blazer holding a clipboard. "Good morning. My name is Angela Ruiz. I'm from New York City Child Protective Services." Sophie's blood ran cold. Nathan was at her side in an instant, his posture immediately defensive. "What's this about?" His voice was firm but polite. Angela gave a small professional smile. "We received an anonymous report about the welfare of 2 children, Ella and Lily Brooks. We're required to conduct a home visit to ensure their safety." Sophie's heart stopped. Anonymous? There was no doubt in her mind who had made that call. Ryan. Nathan's jaw tightened. "May I ask what exactly was reported?" Angela checked her notes. "The claim states that Ms. Brooks has been living in unstable conditions and may not be fit to care for her children. It also mentions that she's relying on financial support from a benefactor without any legal guardianship arrangement." Sophie felt like she was going to be sick. Ryan was trying to paint her as unfit. Nathan, however, remained composed. "That's absurd," he said coolly. "Sophie has done everything for those girls. She's the best mother I've ever seen." Angela remained neutral. "We'll still need to conduct an assessment. Standard procedure." Nathan turned to Sophie, his gaze steady. "We have nothing to hide. Let her do her job." Sophie hated this. She hated the way Angela's eyes moved around the penthouse, scanning every detail. She hated the way Ella and Lily were asked questions about their home life. But the worst part, the way Angela looked at her, like she was someone who had already failed. By the time the interview was over, Sophie felt like she had been put through an emotional blender. Angela closed her notebook. "We'll be following up soon. In the meantime, I'd advise you to seek legal guidance. Custody cases can become complicated." Custody. That word sent an icy chill through her veins. Was Ryan planning to take the girls from her? As soon as the door closed behind Angela, Sophie collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. Nathan knelt beside her. "Hey, look at me." She did. "We are not going to let him win," he promised. But Sophie wasn't sure she had any fight left. Nathan knew Sophie was terrified, and it infuriated him. He wanted to fix this, to make it go away. But there was something else lurking in the shadows of this mess. The media. His PR team had already warned him. Word was getting out. His name was being linked to a struggling single mother in ways that weren't exactly flattering. Some news outlets were spinning it into a Cinderella story. Others, they were twisting it into something far uglier. A powerful billionaire saving a homeless woman? Speculation ran wild. Did he have a hidden agenda? Was Sophie a gold digger? Nathan clenched his fists as he scrolled through the headlines. He hated this, not because of the scrutiny on him, but because Sophie didn't deserve this at all. When Sophie walked into the living room later that night, he didn't tell her about the media storm brewing. She already had enough on her plate. Instead, he simply asked, "How are the girls?" Sophie sighed, running a hand through her hair. Confused, I tried to make it sound like a simple interview, but they're smart. They know something is wrong. Nathan exhaled. We need to get ahead of this. Sophie looked at him warily. Ahead of what? Nathan hesitated before finally showing her his phone. The headlines, the comments, the accusations. Sophie's eyes widened in horror. Oh my God. I have a PR team working on it, Nathan assured her. But Sophie wasn't listening anymore. She was scrolling, reading. And then her breath hitched. Nathan frowned. What is it? Sophie turned the phone toward him. A photo. One she hadn't seen before. Of her. Pregnant. The image was grainy but unmistakable. And the caption beneath it? Sources claim the father of Sophie Brooks' twins is a criminal with a history of fraud and abuse. Could her billionaire Xavier be next? Nathan saw the way Sophie froze. He saw the way her hands trembled as she held the phone. And something inside of him snapped. Enough was enough. Nathan wasn't just going to sit back and let Ryan or the media tear Sophie apart. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Get me the best family lawyer in the city. I want a legal team assembled tonight. Sophie's head shot up. Nathan, he cut her off. This ends now. Sophie looked torn. I don't want you getting dragged into this. I am in this, Sophie. His voice was firm. You and the girls are not alone. And I will not stand by and watch while Ryan tries to ruin your life. She was silent. Then finally she whispered, Thank you. But Nathan didn't need gratitude. He needed results. And he was willing to do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant making enemies, even if it meant going up against the system itself. Because one thing was clear. Ryan had just started a war, and Nathan was going to make sure he lost. The city never slept, but for Sophie Brooks, the weight of sleepless nights was more than just a metaphor. It had been a week since the social services visit, and though there had been no immediate action, the looming threat of losing her daughters consumed her every thought. Nathan had done everything in his power to shield her from the media storm, from relentless reporters to cruel online speculation. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next, because Ryan wasn't finished, and this time he was going to hit where it hurt the most. Sophie had avoided social media ever since the first wave of articles had started appearing, but she wasn't completely disconnected from the world. That morning, while preparing breakfast for Ella and Lily, she heard her name on the television. She turned, her breath catching in her throat, as a news anchor read aloud from a breaking story. New allegations surface against Sophie Brooks, the former fiancée of disgraced lawyer Ryan Morgan. Sources claim she has been manipulating billionaire Nathan Cole into financial support, raising questions about her true intentions. Could this be the biggest con of the decade? Sophie's stomach twisted. Nathan, who had just entered the kitchen, froze. His expression darkened as he listened to the next segment. A leaked report suggests that Ms. Brooks may have been involved in financial fraud, alongside her ex. While no formal charges have been filed, the public is beginning to question whether Cole Financial Group should be involved with someone of questionable integrity. Sophie dropped the plate she had been holding. It shattered into pieces against the tiled floor. Nathan snapped the remote control from the counter and turned off the TV. Silence filled the room, except for the quiet sniffles of Ella and Lily. Sophie turned to them immediately, her hands shaking. It's okay, babies. Mommy just dropped something. Everything's okay. But everything wasn't okay. Nathan exhaled, stepping forward and wrapping a protective hand around Sophie's shoulder. This is what he wanted, he murmured. Sophie knew that. Ryan wanted her to break. He wanted to push her to the point where she had no choice but to collapse under the pressure. But she couldn't. Not for herself, and especially not for her daughters. Nathan had always been known for his ability to stay calm under pressure. But watching Sophie tremble as she tried to reassure her daughters, it shattered something in him. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. This wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about obligation. It was something else. Something far deeper. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Nathan found Sophie sitting alone in the penthouse living room, staring at the city skyline. He sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then quietly Nathan broke the silence. "Sophie?" She turned to him, her eyes weary. "What if I told you that you don't have to go through this alone?" She swallowed hard. "Nathan, I appreciate everything you've done for us, but I'm not talking about what I've done. I'm talking about what I feel." Sophie froze. Nathan exhaled slowly. "I need you to understand something," he continued. "This isn't just about fighting for you in court. It's not just about protecting you from the media. It's—" His voice faltered, but only for a second. "It's about you. And me." Sophie's breath caught. "Nathan, I know you don't trust easily. I know you've been through hell. But I need you to know that I care, more than I probably should." Sophie looked away, her heart pounding. "Nathan, I don't know if I can—" "I'm not asking you to do anything," he interrupted gently. "I just need you to hear me." Her throat tightened, because for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, someone wasn't asking her to give. Someone was just offering. Nathan leaned closer, his voice lower now. "I don't care what the world thinks, Sophie. I don't care about the media or the rumors or the consequences. What I care about is you and those two little girls upstairs." Her chest ached. She wanted to believe him, but there was still so much fear, so much doubt, so much baggage. She opened her mouth to say something, anything. But before she could, Nathan did something she never expected. He reached forward, and gently he took her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Sophie didn't know how long they sat like that, holding hands, not speaking, just existing in the same space. But eventually she broke the silence. "There's something I never told you." Nathan lifted his gaze. "What is it?" Sophie hesitated. Then with a deep breath she whispered, "In high school, I did notice you." Nathan blinked. For a moment he looked stunned. Sophie smiled faintly. "I never told anyone. I was too busy trying to impress people who didn't matter. But you always stood out to me." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Then, why?" "Because I was stupid," she admitted. "I was young and insecure, and afraid of what people would think." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I spent so much time pretending not to see you. And now, you're the only person who's ever truly seen me." Nathan exhaled. His grip on her hand tightened, and Sophie felt something inside her shift. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting for something more. Nathan and Sophie didn't kiss that night. They didn't even speak much after that moment. But something changed. Something clicked into place. Nathan wasn't just her savior anymore. He was hers, and she was his. But just as things began to settle, a new storm was already forming on the horizon. Because Ryan, he wasn't done yet. And the next time he struck, he wasn't coming for Sophie. He was coming for the twins. The city was restless, but nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Nathan Cole's mind. For weeks he had played defense, shielding Sophie from the media, protecting her daughters, and countering every false narrative Ryan Morgan threw their way. But he was done reacting. It was time to go on the offensive. And that meant uncovering the truth. Nathan sat in his office, eyes scanning the confidential files on his desk. His private investigator, Miles Thornton, a former FBI agent turned corporate security expert, sat across from him. "You were right," Miles said, pushing a thick folder forward. "Ryan Morgan isn't just a deadbeat ex. He's a full-fledged con artist." Nathan exhaled sharply. "Tell me everything." Miles opened the file, flipping through pages of bank statements, wire transfers, and criminal complaints. "Ryan's been operating under multiple aliases," Miles explained. "He's scammed investors, embezzled funds from law firms, and racked up millions in gambling debt." Nathan clenched his jaw. "And now, he thinks he can manipulate Sophie into saving him." "Exactly," Miles nodded. "His latest scheme involved taking out a high-interest loan from some, let's just say, less-than-legal lenders." Nathan's brows furrowed. "Loan sharks? Worse," Miles said grimly. "People who don't send overdue notices, they send warnings." Nathan's stomach churned. He knew Ryan was desperate, but this was beyond what he had expected. Miles continued. "The moment you stepped in to protect Sophie, Ryan lost his leverage. That's why he's resorting to a smear campaign. He wants to destroy her credibility before you can expose him." Nathan's grip tightened around his pen. "Not happening." Miles smirked. "Didn't think so." Nathan leaned forward. "What's our next move?" Miles pulled out a USB drive. "On this, you'll find phone recordings, financial records, and witness statements. Enough evidence to bury Ryan in a courtroom and ensure he never comes near Sophie or the twins again." Nathan exhaled, his resolve hardening. It was time to strike. Back at the penthouse, Sophie sat curled on the couch, staring at her phone. She had been avoiding the internet, but curiosity got the best of her. A viral video was circulating, one of the reporters who had ambushed her on the street. Gold digger or tragic figure? The woman at the center of this scandal remains silent. But isn't silence just an admission of guilt? Sophie's hands shook. Was this what people thought of her? That she was using Nathan? That she was some pathetic woman who couldn't take care of herself? Her throat tightened. She had been through hell. She had fought every single day to protect her daughters. And now, after everything, the world still saw her as a charity case? She wasn't sure when the tears started falling. She just knew she couldn't stop them. And then, a warm hand landed on her shoulder. "Nathan." She jumped slightly, wiping her face. I didn't hear you come in." Nathan didn't speak at first. He just crouched in front of her, studying her face. "Sophie," he said softly, "talk to me." She swallowed hard. But when she met his gaze, the genuine concern, the unwavering support, something inside her cracked. Her voice came out in a whisper. "I don't think I can do this." Nathan's brows furrowed. "Do what?" She exhaled shakily. "All of it." She gestured vaguely. "The attention, the judgment, the fear. I feel like I'm drowning, and no matter how hard I try, I can't." Her voice broke. Nathan reached forward, grasping her hands gently. "Sophie," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you are not alone." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "That's what Ryan used to say." Nathan's expression darkened at the mention of her ex. "But he left," she continued, voice hollow. "And I learned the hard way that the only person I can truly count on is myself." Nathan's grip on her hands tightened slightly. "You don't have to count on me," he said. "But I need you to know something." She looked up, eyes glassy. "I will never leave you." Her breath hitched. "I don't care what the media says. I don't care what Ryan does. I don't care how long it takes for you to believe it." He exhaled, squeezing her hands once more. "I'm not going anywhere, Sophie." Her heart clenched painfully. She wanted to believe him, but could she? 2 nights later, Miles called Nathan again. "We've got a problem," he said, voice tight. Nathan stiffened. "What kind of problem?" "Ryan's gone." Nathan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean gone?" "He disappeared," Miles said. "No credit card usage, no phone activity. He's either hiding," Miles hesitated, "or he's planning something." Nathan's grip on his phone tightened. His instincts screamed that Ryan wasn't finished, and whatever he was planning next, it was going to be worse than anything before. That night, Sophie tucked Ella and Lily into bed. She kissed their foreheads, whispering words of comfort. But down in the street below the penthouse, a dark figure stood watching, waiting, plotting. Ryan wasn't done. And soon, Sophie would realize just how dangerous he truly was. The city never truly slept, but tonight, an eerie silence hung in the air. Nathan Cole stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on the enemy, lurking in the shadows. Ryan Morgan had vanished, and that could only mean one thing. He was planning something. The morning began with a knock on the penthouse door. Nathan and Sophie exchanged a wary glance before Nathan pulled the door open. A woman in a dark gray business suit stood there, holding a legal envelope. Her expression was unreadable, professional, but there was something cold in her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Laura Whitmore, legal counsel, representing Mr. Ryan Morgan." Sophie stiffened instantly. Nathan crossed his arms. "What do you want?" Laura held out the envelope. "Mr. Morgan has officially filed for full custody of Ella and Lily." The world seemed to tilt. Sophie felt her heart stop. "What?" she whispered. Laura remained expressionless. "The case will proceed to family court within the next 2 weeks. Until then, my client expects full visitation rights." Nathan ripped the envelope from her hand, scanning the documents inside. It was official. Ryan wasn't just trying to ruin Sophie's life. He was trying to take her children. As soon as the lawyer left, Sophie collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling. "He's going to take them," she whispered. "He's going to—" Nathan knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders firmly. "No, he's not." Sophie's eyes filled with panic. "You don't understand, Nathan," she choked out. "The court, they always favor the biological parent, and I don't have money or a stable home or—" Nathan cupped her face gently. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "You do have a home. You do have stability. And as for money?" His lips twitched. "I think we'll be okay." Sophie let out a half laugh, half sob. "But what if—" Nathan cut her off. "No more what ifs. We fight, Sophie, and we win." Nathan wasted no time. Within hours, his legal team, the best in the city, was gathered in his office. Elliot Graves, a sharp, ruthless attorney, reviewed the case file. "Ryan Morgan has no stable job, a criminal record, and a trail of fraudulent activities," Elliot said. "On paper, he doesn't stand a chance. But," Nathan pressed. Elliot sighed. "But the courts prioritize keeping families together. If Ryan paints Sophie as an unfit mother, it complicates things." Nathan's eyes darkened. "He's not taking those kids." Elliot nodded. "Then we build our case." They strategized for hours. Character witnesses, financial records, psychological evaluations. Nathan would burn every dollar he had if it meant keeping Sophie's daughters safe. The next day, headlines exploded. Millionaire involved in custody battle over Beggar's children. Is Nathan Cole being manipulated by a former flame? Sophie Brooks, gold digger or tragic mother? Sophie stared at the screen, horrified. Nathan's jaw ticked with fury. "This is Ryan," he muttered. "He's trying to turn public opinion against you." Sophie's hands clenched into fists. "I can't do this," she whispered. Nathan turned to her sharply. "Yes, you can." She looked up, her eyes brimming with doubt. Nathan softened. "You're stronger than you think, Sophie," he said. "And you're not doing this alone." The air inside the courthouse was thick with tension. Nathan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, his gaze cold and unwavering, as he stared at the man sitting across from him. Ryan Morgan. Sophie sat beside Nathan, hands clenched tightly together. Today wasn't just about her or Ryan. It was about Ella and Lily. And she would not lose them. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, entered and took her seat. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. "Be seated," the judge said, flipping through the case files. She adjusted her glasses and narrowed her eyes at Ryan. "Mr. Morgan, you have petitioned for full custody of Ella and Lily Brooks, arguing that their mother, Sophie Brooks, is an unfit parent." Ryan nodded smugly. The judge turned to Nathan. "And you, Mr. Cole, have filed to be recognized as a legal guardian in case of a ruling against Ms. Brooks." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." Ryan's lawyer, Laura Whitmore, stood first. "Your Honor, my client is the biological father of these children," Laura began. "Despite any past mistakes, he has the right to be in their lives. Ms. Brooks has been living in unstable conditions for years, relying on charity. This court should grant custody to Mr. Morgan, who is prepared to provide financial stability." Nathan leaned forward slightly, but Elliot Graves, his own lawyer, gave him a warning glance. "Patience," Elliot murmured. The judge turned to Sophie. "Ms. Brooks, do you have a response?" Sophie stood, her knees slightly shaking. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, voice steady despite the fear inside her. "Ryan Morgan was never there for Ella and Lily. He abandoned me when I was pregnant. He didn't even know their names until 2 weeks ago." Ryan scoffed, playing the victim. "That's not true," he interrupted. "I didn't know she was pregnant. She never told me." Nathan gritted his teeth. The audacity of this man was infuriating. The judge raised a hand, silencing them. "Mr. Morgan, your turn will come." Ryan's lawyer smirked and continued. "Your Honor, what we're arguing is that Ms. Brooks is emotionally unstable. She has a history of homelessness, unemployment, and relying on the charity of others." Laura turned, staring directly at Nathan. "And now, she is dependent on Mr. Cole, a billionaire who has taken an unusual personal interest in her case." Nathan stiffened. "This isn't about money," Sophie snapped. "I have worked every day to protect and provide for my daughters." Ryan's lawyer smiled like a shark smelling blood. "Then, let's talk about that." They grilled Sophie mercilessly. "How many jobs have you held in the past 4 years? Have you ever had a steady income? You lived on the streets for nearly 2 years. Do you believe that's a safe environment for 2 young children?" Sophie's hands trembled, but Nathan reached under the table and gave her a firm squeeze. "You're not alone." Finally, it was Elliot's turn. "My client, Ms. Brooks, has faced extreme hardships, yes. But despite those challenges, she has never abandoned her daughters. She has protected them, sacrificed for them, and never once gave up." He turned to Ryan, his expression sharp. "Can Mr. Morgan say the same?" Ryan's lawyer objected immediately. But Elliot wasn't done. "In fact," Elliot continued, walking towards the judge, "Mr. Morgan has a history of fraud, debt, and criminal activities. He has multiple gambling debts and was recently involved in an investigation regarding money laundering." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Ryan's smirk faded. And that's when Nathan knew. They had him. Elliot dropped a thick folder on the judge's desk. These are financial records proving that Mr. Morgan is thousands of dollars in debt. He's not here for his daughters. He's here to use them as leverage. Ryan's face turned red. That's a lie, he shouted. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Morgan, sit down, she said coldly. Ryan's lawyer, looking increasingly nervous, tried to redirect the case. Even if that were true, my client still deserves a second chance. Elliot smirked. We agree, he said smoothly, which is why we propose monitored visitation only, pending psychological evaluation. Ryan's mouth fell open. No way, he growled. The judge took a deep breath and glanced at Sophie. Ms. Brooks, would you be open to that? Sophie hesitated. Then she nodded. If it's what's best for Ella and Lily, then yes. Ryan looked furious. But before anything else could happen, a loud commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A police officer rushed in, heading straight for the judge. He whispered something in her ear. Her eyes widened. Mr. Morgan, she said, her voice suddenly steely. Ryan turned. What? She lifted a document the officer had just handed her. This is a warrant for your arrest. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Nathan and Sophie froze. Elliot raised an eyebrow, as if he had seen it coming. Ryan's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is outrageous. But Ryan was already panicking. What? That's insane. What am I being arrested for? The officer stepped forward. Fraud, embezzlement, and violating parole. Nathan let out a slow breath. It was over. The judge banged her gavel. This court rules in favor of Ms. Brooks, she announced. Ryan Morgan is hereby denied custody and will receive no visitation rights until further notice. Sophie let out a choked sob. Nathan turned to her, relief washing over him. They had won. Ryan, still cursing, was dragged from the courtroom in handcuffs. As soon as they stepped outside, Sophie dropped to her knees and hugged Ella and Lily tightly. Nathan stood behind them, watching the scene with soft eyes. Sophie looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. We did it, she whispered. Nathan reached down, gently brushing her hair behind her ear. No, Sophie, he said. You did it. She smiled through her tears. For the first time in years, she felt free. The celebration of their courtroom victory was short-lived. That night, as Sophie tucked Ella and Lily into bed, she felt an uneasy chill crawl up her spine. Something didn't feel right. Nathan had increased security around his penthouse, ensuring that no one, especially Ryan Morgan, could get close. But somehow, trouble always found a way. Nathan sat in his office, flipping through legal documents. His company had suffered minor setbacks due to the scandal, but nothing he couldn't handle. His priority was Sophie and the twins. Just as he was about to shut down his laptop, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He frowned. Something about it felt wrong. He answered. At first, there was only silence. Then a voice that made his blood run cold. You took something from me, Cole. Nathan gripped the phone tighter. Ryan, he growled. You took everything, Ryan continued, his tone low and venomous. And now I'm taking something from you. Nathan shot up from his chair, heart pounding. What the hell are you talking about? Then, a child's terrified scream came through the line. Nathan's stomach dropped. Ella. Nathan ran to Sophie's room, slamming the door open. Sophie, startled, sat up immediately. What's wrong? She asked, voice laced with fear. Nathan's face was pale and furious. It's Ella, he said. Ryan took her. Sophie's heart stopped. Lily, still half asleep, stirred beside her. Sophie sprang out of bed, gripping Nathan's arms. "No, no, no, this can't be happening," she sobbed. "How?" "We had security." Nathan's jaw tightened. Ryan had found a way around them. And now they had minutes, not hours, to get Ella back. Nathan redialed the number, his hands shaking with pure rage. Ryan answered, chuckling darkly. "Miss me?" Nathan's voice was ice cold. "If you hurt her, I swear." "Oh, relax." Ryan cut him off. "She's safe, for now. But if you want her to stay that way, you're going to do exactly what I say." Sophie clutched her chest, barely able to breathe. "What do you want?" Nathan hissed. Ryan's voice darkened. $10 million. Sophie gasped. Nathan didn't even hesitate. "Done." "Where do I send it?" Ryan laughed. "Oh, no, no, no. It's not that simple." Nathan gritted his teeth. "What do you mean?" "I don't just want money," Ryan whispered. "I want you to suffer." Nathan's blood boiled. "What do you want me to do?" Ryan paused for a long moment. "Come alone." "Midnight, warehouse on Pier 46. Sophie shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No, it's a trap." Ryan ignored her cries. "If I see the cops, if you bring anyone else, the deal is off. And your little girl, she disappears forever." The line went dead. Nathan's fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He had been in high-stakes negotiations before. But this was life or death. Sophie was sobbing uncontrollably. "We have to call the police," she pleaded. "We have to—" Nathan grabbed her shoulders gently but firmly. "Sophie, listen to me." His voice was steady, strong. "I will get her back, but I promise you." Something in his eyes made her believe him. Sophie nodded, wiping away her tears. Nathan turned to his head of security, Liam Foster. "I want eyes on every single exit point in that warehouse. If anything goes wrong, you get Ella out first." Liam nodded sharply. Sophie looked up, confused. "But," he said, "no backup." Nathan gave a grim smile. "I never play fair." The warehouse was silent. Nathan stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his polished shoes. His heartbeat was steady, his mind sharp. "Stay calm. Get Ella. Get out." A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows. Then, footsteps. Ryan emerged from the darkness, holding Ella by the arm. Her little face was stained with tears. "Daddy," she cried. Nathan's chest ached at the word. Ryan's grip tightened on Ella's wrist. "Where's my money, Cole?" Nathan pulled a briefcase from his side. "Right here." He set it down. "Let her go first," Ryan smirked. "Do I look stupid to you?" Nathan's jaw tightened. He took a slow step forward. "Ryan, let her go." Ryan's eyes flickered with something. Doubt. Uncertainty. Nathan seized the moment. One move. That's all it took. In a flash, Nathan lunged forward, knocking Ryan to the ground. Ryan screamed, losing his grip on Ella. Nathan grabbed the little girl and shoved her behind him. Ryan scrambled back, reaching for a gun tucked into his waistband. Bang! A shot rang out. Nathan barely had time to react. But then, Ryan collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain. Behind him, Sophie stood, shaking, holding the gun. Her hands trembled violently. Nathan turned, eyes wide with shock. "Sophie?" She dropped the gun, collapsing into his arms. Ella screamed for her mother, and Nathan caught both of them. Police sirens wailed in the distance. It was over. Ryan Morgan was done for good. The hospital was quiet. Ella was safe, sleeping in Sophie's arms. Nathan sat beside them, his hand clasped around Sophie's. She looked up at him, exhausted but relieved. "I thought I lost her," she whispered. Nathan squeezed her hand. "You never will." Tears slipped down her face. "Thank you," she murmured. Nathan brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his voice rough with emotion. "I would do it again, 1,000 times." Sophie leaned forward and kissed him. Nathan froze. Then slowly he melted into it. A kiss that wasn't about desperation or fear. It was about trust, family, and a future they would build together. The world outside Nathan's penthouse felt different in the days following the rescue. For Sophie, the air was lighter, as if she could breathe freely for the first time in years. For Nathan, something had shifted. The night of the kidnapping had solidified something deep inside him. He wasn't just helping Sophie and the twins anymore. He needed them so as much as they needed him. Sophie sat in the plush leather chair in Nathan's study, staring at the morning sunlight filtering through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. She still couldn't believe it. Ella was safe. Ryan was gone. For good this time. And yet she couldn't shake the fear that had lived inside her for so long. Nathan walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her and sat across from her, watching her closely. "You're thinking about him," he said quietly. Sophie's throat tightened. "I'm thinking about everything," she admitted. Nathan set his cup down, leaning forward. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. "Ryan can't hurt you. He can't take the girls." Sophie let out a shaky breath, running a hand through her hair. "I know," she said. "It's just, I've been in survival mode for so long. I don't know how to just exist without looking over my shoulder." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to figure it out alone." Her eyes met his, searching, as if trying to understand why he still cared so much. "Nathan, why are you doing all this?" His grip tightened slightly, but his voice was steady. "Because I want to." Sophie swallowed, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. She pulled her hand away, looking down. "I can't. I don't know how to let myself need someone." Nathan studied her carefully. "Then don't think of it as needing me," he said gently. "Think of it as trusting me." Sophie looked up, eyes filled with conflicted emotions. Trust. That was the hardest thing of all. The days passed in a blur of small victories and quiet moments. Ella and Lily began sleeping peacefully again, no longer waking up with nightmares. Sophie started to relax, allowing herself to smile more often. And Nathan? Nathan found himself watching her more closely, drawn to the way she was slowly rebuilding herself. One afternoon, as Sophie helped Mrs. Carter in the kitchen, Nathan walked in and paused at the doorway. Sophie was laughing, a soft, genuine laugh, as she tried and failed to roll out dough properly. Mrs. Carter shook her head, muttering something about how she had no technique at all. And for the first time in years, Sophie looked light. Nathan's chest tightened at the sight. Mrs. Carter caught him staring and smirked. "You're looking at her like a lovesick puppy," she said. Nathan snapped out of it, clearing his throat. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. Mrs. Carter just chuckled, returning to her baking. Nathan's eyes lingered on Sophie a little longer. Maybe Mrs. Carter was right. Maybe he was falling for her. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Sophie walked into Nathan's office. She stood in the doorway, hesitating. Nathan looked up from his laptop, sensing something serious in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I need to find a job," she said. Nathan frowned. "You don't have to rush." "I do," she interrupted. "I can't just live here forever, Nathan. I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to stand on my own feet." Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I understand," he said finally. Sophie exhaled, relieved. "But," Nathan continued, I have an offer. Sophie's brows furrowed. Nathan reached into his desk and pulled out a folder. I want you to work at Cole Financial, he said. Sophie stared at him. Nathan, I'm not offering you charity, he cut her off. I've seen how you handle things. You're smart, determined, and you don't back down from a challenge. That's exactly what I need on my team. Sophie bit her lip. I don't know anything about finance. Nathan smirked. You'll learn. Sophie hesitated, feeling torn. On one hand, it was an opportunity she never imagined she'd have. On the other, working for Nathan meant staying close to him, and that scared her more than anything. Finally, she took a deep breath. Okay, she said, I'll do it. Nathan's smile was soft, but proud. You won't regret it. And neither of them knew it then. But this decision would change everything. Sophie's first few days at Cole Financial Group were a whirlwind. The office was a world of sleek suits and high-stakes negotiations. Nathan had assigned her to work directly with him, which only made things more complicated. His employees whispered about her behind closed doors. Who is she? Why is Nathan so protective of her? Sophie ignored the gossip, focusing on proving herself, and to her surprise, she was good at it. Nathan guided her, but never spoon-fed her answers. He challenged her, made her think, and slowly she began to thrive. But outside of work, things between them became more intense. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Sophie found herself venting in Nathan's office. I can't believe how arrogant some of these executives are, she huffed. Nathan chuckled, pouring her a drink. You handled them well, he said. I was impressed. Sophie sighed, taking the glass. I feel like I'm constantly proving myself. Nathan's eyes softened. You don't have to prove anything to me. Sophie looked up at him, feeling that unspoken pull between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Nathan reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sophie's breath hitched. The air between them felt charged. Nathan! His eyes flickered to her lips. But before he could do anything, Sophie stepped back. I should go, she whispered. Nathan let her go. But deep down, they both knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The city glowed under the golden hues of an autumn sunset, the skyline reflecting against the rippling surface of the Hudson River. Nathan sat in his office, staring out at the view, his mind occupied with thoughts of Sophie. It had been weeks since she started working at Cole Financial, and she had proven herself beyond capable. But that wasn't what occupied his mind. It was the moments in between. The way she bit her lip when she concentrated. The soft laughter she shared with Ella and Lily. The way she pulled away whenever they got too close. Nathan was done waiting. Tonight, he would make a move that would change everything. Nathan had planned a weekend getaway, a private trip for Sophie and the twins. When he announced it over dinner, Ella and Lily squealed in excitement. We're going to the beach? Ella asked, her blue eyes wide. Nathan smirked. Not just any beach, a private villa right on the shore. Sophie blinked. Nathan, this is too much. Too late, he interrupted. It's already booked. She sighed, shaking her head. But deep down, she couldn't deny. The thought of escaping the city was tempting. And so, that Friday afternoon, Nathan, Sophie, and the twins boarded a private jet, heading for a secluded coastal paradise. The villa was breathtaking, white sand, crystal clear waters, and a luxurious open-concept beach house. Ella and Lily ran toward the waves, giggling as the ocean kissed their feet. Nathan and Sophie stood on the balcony watching them. Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, inhaling the salty breeze. It's beautiful here, she admitted. Nathan glanced at her. I thought you'd like it. She looked up at him. Why are you doing all this? Nathan turned fully toward her, his expression serious. Because you deserve to experience happiness, Sophie? She swallowed, looking away. I don't know if I know how to. Nathan tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. You will, he said softly. And I'll be right here when you do. Sophie's heart pounded, but before she could respond, a small voice interrupted. Mommy, Nathan, come play with us. Ella stood at the edge of the water, waving eagerly. Sophie let out a breathless laugh. Nathan smirked. Saved by the kids. Sophie shook her head, smiling. For now. That evening, as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, Nathan set his plan in motion. He arranged a private dinner right on the beach, a table illuminated by soft lanterns, waves gently lapping at the shore. Ella and Lily, dressed in matching white sundresses, sat beside Sophie, their excitement barely contained. Sophie, wearing a flowing navy blue dress, looked around in wonder. This is incredible, she whispered. Nathan, sitting across from her, smiled. Now or never. Halfway through dinner, Nathan cleared his throat. There's something I want to say, he began. Sophie looked up, sensing the shift in his tone. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's breath caught. Ella and Lily's eyes widened in delight. Nathan got up from his seat, moving beside Sophie. Then he did something Sophie never expected. He got down on one knee. The twins gasped, bouncing in their seats. Nathan's voice was steady, but his eyes held undeniable emotion. Sophie, when I first saw you on that street corner, I thought I was rescuing you. But the truth is, you rescued me. He took a deep breath, eyes never leaving hers. You made me realize that love isn't about perfection. It's about fighting for the people who matter. You and the girls, you're my family. Nathan opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. Sophie Brooks, will you marry me? Sophie froze. The twins held their breath. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the waves. Then, a single tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Nathan's heart pounded in anticipation. Finally, Sophie nodded, voice barely above a whisper. Yes! Ella and Lily screamed in excitement, jumping up and down. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a deep, breathtaking kiss. The twins ran into their arms, laughing and cheering. And in that moment, under the stars and the sound of the ocean, Nathan, Sophie, Ella, and Lily became a real family. Back at the villa, the girls were fast asleep, their stuffed animals tucked beside them. Sophie stood on the balcony, staring at the ring on her finger. Nathan walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You still look shocked, he murmured. Sophie let out a soft laugh. I am. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. Are you sure about this? She whispered. Nathan frowned, cupping her face. Sophie, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Her chest tightened. She rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. Then, I guess, I just have to let myself believe it's real. Nathan smiled. It is. And for the first time in her life, the morning sun filtered through the grand windows of Nathan's penthouse, casting a soft glow over the living room. The place, once cold and impersonal, was now alive, filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of tiny feet running across the floors. Nathan stood in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, as he watched Sophie and the twins playing on the couch. Ella and Lily were giggling, attempting to fix their mother's hair with tiny clips and ribbons. Sophie, laughing despite herself, looked up and met Nathan's gaze. What? She asked, amusement in her tone. Nathan smirked. Nothing. Just thinking how lucky I am. Sophie rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. This was their new normal, a home filled with love. And soon, that home would witness one of the most important days of their lives. Sophie had never imagined getting married, let alone to a billionaire. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a full-length mirror, watching as Mrs. Carter, the ever-efficient housekeeper, adjusted the fabric of her wedding dress. "You look stunning, dear," Mrs. Carter murmured. Sophie's throat tightened. For years, she had felt unworthy of happiness. But today, she felt beautiful. Nathan and Sophie had agreed. No extravagant ballroom, no paparazzi, no elite guest list. Instead, they chose a small, intimate ceremony on the rooftop of Nathan's penthouse, with only their closest friends. The setting was breathtaking, string lights twinkling, a soft evening breeze carrying the scent of fresh roses. Ella and Lily, dressed in matching flower girl dresses, scattered petals down the aisle. Nathan stood at the altar, dressed in a tailored black tux, his gaze locked on Sophie as she walked toward him. For a man who had built his empire on control, Nathan found himself completely undone by the sight of her. When she finally reached him, he exhaled softly, taking her hands in his. "You're incredible," he whispered. Sophie smiled, her eyes shimmering with emotion. The officiant cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" Nathan went first. "Sophie," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I spent my life thinking that love was just another business transaction, that emotions were a weakness. But then I found you. You and the girls. You taught me what real strength is. You made me believe in love, in family, in second chances." Nathan took a deep breath. "I vow to protect you, to cherish you, to be the man you deserve every single day." A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. Then she spoke. "Nathan," she whispered, "I spent so long thinking I wasn't worth saving, that no one would ever stay. But you stayed. You fought for me, even when I didn't know how to fight for myself." She squeezed his hands. "So today, I promise you this. I will never run again. I will love you, fiercely and fearlessly, for the rest of my life." Silence fell over the rooftop. Then, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Nathan didn't wait. He pulled Sophie into his arms, kissing her deeply as Ella and Lily cheered. The reception was perfect. Laughter, music, and heartfelt toasts from their closest friends. Ella and Lily were unstoppable, twirling in their flower dresses as they danced with Nathan. Sophie, watching them, felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. She was home. As the evening drew to a close, Nathan pulled Sophie onto the dance floor. They swayed slowly, the city skyline stretching behind them. "This is only the beginning," Nathan murmured. Sophie rested her head against his chest. "I know." She closed her eyes, letting herself believe it, because this time there were no more doubts. The early morning light streamed through the curtains of the penthouse, casting a golden hue across the room. Sophie stretched, feeling the warmth of Nathan beside her. She turned slightly, watching him as he slept. His features relaxed in a way she rarely saw. Her heart swelled, with love, with peace, with the kind of happiness she once thought was impossible. Everything had changed, and yet it felt like it had always been meant to be this way. Nathan stirred, his hand reaching out for her, before his eyes even opened. "Morning, Mrs. Cole," he murmured, a lazy smile playing on his lips. Sophie laughed softly. "Still getting used to that?" "Well, you better get used to it," he teased, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "Because you're stuck with me forever." She smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Forever." Downstairs, The sound of tiny feet pattering against the hardwood floor echoed through the penthouse. "Mommy! Daddy!" Ella's voice rang out. "Wake up!" Lily followed close behind, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. Nathan groaned, pulling the covers over his head. 5 more minutes, he mumbled dramatically. Ella huffed, climbing onto the bed. "No! We have a big day today." Sophie chuckled, pulling the covers back. All right. What's so important?" Lily's eyes sparkled. "We're making pancakes." Nathan pretended to consider. "Only if I get extra chocolate chips." "Deal," the twins chorused. And just like that, their morning began with laughter. The once sterile penthouse, now a home filled with love. Later that day, Nathan and Sophie took the twins to the park, something they did regularly now. It was a simple thing, watching Ella and Lily race across the playground, their laughter ringing through the crisp autumn air. But to Sophie, it was everything. And Nathan sat beside her on the bench, watching their daughters with a soft smile. "You know," he said, taking her hand, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here with a wife and 2 kids, I would have laughed in their face." Sophie smirked. "And now?" Nathan squeezed her hand. "Now, I can't imagine my life any other way." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. "This is all I ever wanted," she whispered. Nathan kissed the top of her head. "Me too." That evening, after putting the twins to bed, Sophie stood in the bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in her hands. Her heart pounded. Positive? She swallowed hard, tears pooling in her eyes. She hadn't expected this, not so soon. But as she placed a hand over her stomach, she felt a deep, undeniable joy. She was going to be a mother again. She found him in his office, reviewing a contract, his brows slightly furrowed in concentration. Sophie leaned against the doorframe, watching him for a moment. She never thought she'd see the day when this man, once so cold and guarded, would become her home. "Hey," she finally said. Nathan looked up and immediately sensed something was different. "What is it?" he asked, setting the papers aside. Sophie took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the test in her hand. Then she held it out to him. Nathan stared at it, blinking once, twice. Then his jaw dropped. "Sophie?" His voice was barely a whisper. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're having a baby." Nathan was silent for a long moment, his emotions warring on his face. Then, in an instant, he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, almost in awe. She laughed through her tears. "Yes, Nathan." Nathan cupped her face, his eyes filled with nothing but love. "You've given me the greatest gift, Sophie." She smiled, placing his hand over her stomach. "We did this together." Over the next few months, their lives changed once again. Nathan was more protective than ever, ensuring Sophie didn't lift a finger. Ella and Lily were ecstatic about the idea of a new sibling, already arguing over names. And Sophie? For the first time in years, she felt truly, undeniably safe. She spent her days balancing her new life as a wife, a mother, and a businesswoman, growing more confident each day. Nathan continued to be her biggest supporter, reminding her at every turn that she was capable of anything. And as the months passed, their bond only deepened. One stormy night, Sophie went into labor. Nathan, despite being the most composed businessman in the world, panicked. They rushed to the hospital, where hours later, Sophie held their newborn son in her arms. Nathan sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, his other hand gently stroking the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered. Sophie smiled, her exhaustion overshadowed by the overwhelming love filling her heart. "What should we name him?" she asked softly. Nathan thought for a moment, then met her gaze. Noah. Sophie nodded, tears slipping down her face. Noah Cole. It was perfect. Years later, Nathan sat on the porch of their countryside home, watching his children play. Ella and Lily, now bright and full of life, chased their baby brother across the yard, their laughter ringing through the air. Sophie stepped out of the house, holding 2 cups of tea. Nathan smiled up at her, pulling her into his lap. She laughed, resting her head against his chest. Do you ever think about how we got here? She murmured. Nathan sighed, looking out at the life they built together. Every single day. He tilted her chin, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. No matter how lost we were, he whispered, love found us anyway. Sophie smiled, tears in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, it did. And as the sun set over their home, their laughter blending with the sounds of their children, they knew one thing for certain. Their story was just beginning. Life has a way of leading us down unexpected paths. Sometimes, the people we least expect to return to our lives become the ones who change them forever. Nathan and Sophie's journey was filled with hardship, second chances, and the undeniable power of love. But now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Nathan's shoes? Would you have stopped to help or walked away? And what about Sophie? Do you believe in second chances, even after life has knocked you down? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Because sometimes, the most unexpected encounters lead to the most unforgettable endings. Stay tuned, our next story is just around the corner, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.